The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Marcus's laughter echoed across the charity gala, his voice cutting through the elegant chatter like a blade. "Oh, Claire's still playing with her computer doodles in the garage," he announced to the circle of Millbrook Heights' most influential residents, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension that makes your stomach clench. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." She calls it digital art. I call it expensive therapy. The group erupted in polite chuckles, their eyes flickering toward me with that particular blend of pity and amusement reserved for wives whose hobbies are deemed embarrassingly trivial. What they didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, was that I had spent the entire morning finalizing the sale of my digital art collection to a consortium of international collectors for $52 million. The contracts were signed, the wire transfers were pending, and in less than 24 hours, my little hobby would make us wealthier than everyone in this room combined. The evening had started like so many others in our perfectly curated life in Millbrook Heights. Marcus had insisted we attend the annual Grandview Country Club charity gala, not out of any genuine philanthropic impulse, but because the right people would be there. As a senior vice president at Pinnacle Financial, he treated every social gathering as a strategic networking opportunity, and I had long since accepted my role as the well-dressed, appropriately supportive wife who smiled at the right moments and never said anything too interesting. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, a midnight blue silk dress that complemented my auburn hair without being too attention-grabbing. After 15 years of marriage to Marcus, I had perfected the art of being noticed just enough to reflect well on him, but never so much that I might overshadow his carefully cultivated image as Millbrook Heights' rising financial star. The Grandview Country Club's ballroom was a monument to understated wealth, with its crystal chandeliers, casting warm light over polished marble floors and tables draped in crisp white linens. The charity auction for the Children's Hospital was the social event of the season, drawing together everyone who mattered in our insular world of manicured lawns and seven-figure homes. I had been standing near the silent auction tables, examining a watercolor painting donated by a local artist, when Marcus approached with his usual entourage of colleagues and their wives. David Thompson, a real estate mogul with interests in commercial properties, was gesticulating expansively about his latest acquisition. Stephanie Walsh, whose husband ran the largest law firm in the county, was nodding along while checking her phone with practiced subtlety. "Claire's been keeping herself busy with her art projects," Marcus said, sliding his arm around my waist with the possessive casualness that had become his signature gesture at public events. The way he said, "art" projects made it sound like I was finger painting in kindergarten, rather than creating what I knew to be sophisticated digital compositions. "How wonderful," Stephanie replied, with the kind of hollow enthusiasm reserved for conversations about other people's hobbies. "What sort of art do you create?" Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in with the explanation he had rehearsed countless times. "Digital stuff, mostly. She's got this whole setup in the garage with computers and drawing tablets. Very modern, very complicated." He chuckled as though my work was an amusing technological curiosity, rather than something requiring genuine skill or creativity. "It's actually digital illustration and NFT creation," I said quietly, attempting to inject some accuracy into his dismissive summary. "I work primarily with vector graphics and blockchain technology to create unique digital assets." David Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "NFTs? Like those monkey pictures that were all over the news a few years ago?" "Similar technology, but my work focuses more on abstract compositions and interactive elements," I explained, feeling the familiar frustration of trying to describe my passion to people who had already decided it wasn't worth understanding. "Well, it keeps her out of trouble," Marcus said with another laugh, as though my artistic pursuits were equivalent to a child's preoccupation with toy blocks. "Better than spending money shopping, right?" The group laughed politely at his casual sexism, and I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. This was the pattern we had fallen into over the past 3 years, ever since I had started seriously pursuing digital art. Marcus would introduce my work as a charming distraction. I would attempt to explain its actual complexity and value, and he would undercut my credibility with jokes that positioned him as the tolerant husband indulging his wife's silly hobby. What made it particularly painful was that Marcus hadn't always been this dismissive. When we first married, he had been genuinely supportive of my creative interests. I had been working as a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm when we met, and he had seemed impressed by my portfolio and artistic sensibilities. But as his career advanced and our social circle became increasingly focused on traditional markers of success, he had grown embarrassed by my continued involvement in what he saw as a frivolous creative field. The shift had been gradual, but unmistakable. When I left my job 5 years ago to focus on freelance design work, he had been supportive, even encouraging. But when I transitioned into digital art and began exploring the emerging NFT market 3 years ago, his attitude changed. Suddenly my work wasn't real enough, wasn't prestigious enough, wasn't profitable enough to warrant serious consideration. "Has she sold any of her creations?" asked Amanda Rodriguez, whose husband owned a chain of upscale restaurants throughout the state. The question was asked with genuine curiosity, but I could see Marcus tense slightly beside me. "A few small pieces here and there," he said before I could respond. "Nothing significant. It's more about the creative fulfillment than the financial return." This was a lie, and we both knew it. Over the past 18 months, I had been quietly building a reputation in the digital art community under the pseudonym CD Vision. My work had been featured in several online galleries, and I had sold pieces ranging from $500 to $15,000 each. More importantly, I had been approached repeatedly by collectors and investment groups interested in acquiring larger bodies of my work. But Marcus either didn't know the extent of my success or he chose to ignore it. I had learned to keep my achievements to myself after the first few times I excitedly shared good news, only to have him minimize its importance or find ways to diminish my accomplishment. "Claire's very talented," said Rachel Kim, who had appeared at my side with perfect timing. Rachel was one of the few people in our social circle who genuinely understood and appreciated my work. As the chief technology officer for a major software company, she had both the technical knowledge to understand the complexity of digital art creation and the business acumen to recognize its growing market value. Her compositions are really quite sophisticated. The way she layers interactive elements is remarkable. Marcus's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He had never been comfortable with Rachel's presence in our lives, partly because she represented the kind of professional success that he felt should be exclusively masculine, and partly because she refused to play along with his narrative about my work being a harmless hobby. "Rachel's very kind," Marcus said, his tone suggesting that kindness was somehow equivalent to dishonesty. "But let's be realistic about the market for this type of thing. It's very niche, very volatile, not exactly a stable investment opportunity." "The NFT market has actually stabilized quite a bit," Rachel replied calmly, "and the technology is evolving rapidly. Some of the most innovative digital artists are commanding serious prices from institutional collectors." I watched Marcus's jaw tighten as Rachel spoke. He hated being contradicted, especially by women, and especially about topics where his knowledge was limited. But he was too socially savvy to argue directly with Rachel, given her reputation and connections in the tech industry. "Well, we'll see," he said with forced lightness. "Maybe Claire will surprise us all and become the next Picasso of pixels." The group laughed at his joke, and I felt something crack inside my chest. The casual cruelty of reducing my years of dedicated work to a punchline was devastating enough, but doing it in front of people whose opinions mattered to our social standing felt like a public humiliation. "If you'll excuse me," I said with a smile I hoped appeared more genuine than it felt. "I need to check on something." I walked toward the ladies' room, needing a moment to compose myself before returning to the performance of being Marcus's appropriately supportive wife. As I passed through the elegant hallway lined with portraits of the country club's founding members, I caught a glimpse of myself in an antique mirror. I looked pale, strained, like someone slowly disappearing under the weight of constant diminishment. In the privacy of the marble-appointed restroom, I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted messaging app. 3 new notifications awaited. Me, all from Tony Castellano, the art advisor who had been coordinating the sale of my collection. The messages were brief but electrifying. Contracts executed, wire transfers confirmed. Congratulations, Claire. You're about to become very wealthy. Final number, 52R, $3 million. Press coverage scheduled for tomorrow morning. Ready to change your life? I stared at the screen, reading the messages 3 times before their reality fully sank in. $52 million. More money than Marcus made in a decade. More money than most of the people in that ballroom would see in their lifetimes. And it had all come from my little hobby, my computer doodles, my expensive therapy. For 3 years, I had been building this collection in secret, working 16-hour days in my converted garage studio while Marcus attended his networking events and business dinners. I had taught myself advanced digital illustration techniques, studied blockchain technology until I understood it better than most tech professionals, and developed a unique artistic style that combined traditional compositional principles with cutting-edge interactive elements. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The collection, titled Infinite Moments, consisted of 57 interconnected digital pieces that could be experienced individually or as a cohesive narrative journey. Each piece responded to viewer interaction in real time, creating unique experiences that could never be perfectly replicated. The technological innovation alone had taken me 18 months to develop, working with programmers and digital artists from around the world. More importantly, the collection had meaning. Each piece explored themes of human connection, isolation, and the search for authentic identity in an increasingly digital world. The interactive elements weren't just technical showpieces. They were integral to the emotional experience of the work. Viewers could influence color palettes, reveal hidden layers of imagery, and even contribute to the evolution of certain pieces over time. The art world had taken notice. Infinite Moments had been featured in Artforum, Digital Arts Magazine, and the Contemporary Art Review. Collectors had been circling for months, and the final bidding war had involved museums, private collectors, and technology companies from 3 continents. But Marcus knew none of this. He thought I spent my days making pretty pictures on the computer, occasionally selling one for a few $100s to friends who felt sorry for me. He had no idea that I had been invited to speak at digital art conferences, that my work was being studied in university programs, or that I had become something of a legend in the international NFT community. I had kept it secret, partly out of self-protection. After years of having my achievements minimized and my ambitions mocked, I had learned to shield my successes from Marcus's tendency to diminish anything that might threaten his position as the primary breadwinner and decision-maker in our relationship. But I had also kept it secret because I wanted to be absolutely certain of my success before revealing it. Now, with the contracts signed and the money transferred, that certainty had arrived. I returned to the ballroom feeling like I was walking through a different world. The same people were having the same conversations, but everything looked different through the lens of my secret knowledge. Marcus was still holding court near the bar, regaling David Thompson and several other men with some story about a difficult client. He caught my eye and waved me over with the casual assumption that I would immediately comply. "There she is," he said as I approached. "We were just talking about the Peterson account. David was asking about the financial modeling work we did for their expansion project." I nodded politely while David launched into a detailed explanation of commercial real estate trends. As he spoke, I found myself calculating how my newfound wealth compared to the projects and deals that dominated their conversations. David's biggest transaction last year had been a $40 million office complex. Marcus's most successful client had assets worth roughly $30 million. These were the achievements that defined success in their world, and tomorrow morning, my little hobby would eclipse them all. "Claire's probably dying of boredom listening to us talk shop," Marcus said with mock sympathy. "Why don't you tell David about your latest art project? What was it you were working on this week?" The question was clearly intended to redirect the conversation toward something he considered more appropriate for me to discuss. Something harmless, decorative, irrelevant to the serious business matters that occupied the men's attention. "Actually," I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me, "I've been working on something quite significant. The biggest project of my career, actually." Marcus looked pleased, probably assuming I was finally ready to share some appropriately modest creative endeavor that would confirm his narrative about my harmless artistic pursuits. "It's a digital art collection that I've been developing for the past 3 years," I continued. 57 interconnected pieces using proprietary interactive technology. Tomorrow morning, the sale will be announced in the art press. "That sounds fascinating," David said with polite interest. "Local gallery?" "International consortium," I replied. "Museums, private collectors, and technology companies from around the world." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the kind of small-scale local sale he had been expecting me to describe. "Wonderful," Stephanie said. "What sort of price range do these digital pieces typically sell for?" I paused, looking directly at Marcus as I spoke. "This particular collection sold for $52.3 million. The silence that followed was profound. David's wine glass paused halfway to his lips. Stephanie's phone slipped slightly in her suddenly nerveless fingers. Marcus's face went through a remarkable transformation, cycling from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror as the implications of my words sank in. "52 million?" David repeated slowly, as though he might have misheard. "Million," I confirmed. "The contracts were finalized this morning. The wire transfers are processing as we speak." Marcus was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was the look of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. For 15 years, he had been the successful one, the breadwinner, the person whose achievements mattered. I had been the supportive wife, the creative hobbyist, the person whose contributions were decorative rather than substantial. In a single moment, that entire dynamic had been obliterated. My little hobby had generated more wealth than Marcus would earn in his entire career. My computer doodles had made us richer than anyone in this room. My expensive therapy had just become the defining financial achievement of our family's life. The conversation around us had stopped entirely. Other groups were beginning to notice the unusual silence and the expressions of shock on the faces around me. Word was spreading through the ballroom with the kind of rapid efficiency that only exists in insular social communities where everyone knows everyone else's business. "I think," I said quietly, setting down my champagne glass with steady hands, "we need to talk." The drive home from the Grandview Country Club passed in absolute silence. Marcus gripped the steering wheel of his Mercedes with white knuckles. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. The elegant neighborhoods of Millbrook Heights rolled past our windows like scenes from someone else's life, their manicured perfection suddenly feeling fragile and temporary. I stared out at the familiar landscape, remembering the day we had first driven through these streets 15 years ago. Young and optimistic and certain that we were building something meaningful together. Marcus had just been promoted to senior analyst at Pinnacle Financial, and we were house hunting with the kind of excitement that comes from believing your life is unfolding exactly as it should. The Victorian house on Elm Street had been our dream home then, with its wraparound porch and mature oak trees and the detached garage that Marcus had promised I could convert into an art studio someday. That someday had arrived 3 years ago, when I finally claimed the space and began the work that would change everything. Marcus pulled into our driveway and sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the garage where I had spent thousands of hours building my secret empire. The building looked innocent enough from the outside, painted the same crisp white as the main house, with flower boxes beneath the windows that I maintained to keep up appearances. No one would guess that behind those modest walls lay the most sophisticated digital art studio in the tri-state area. $52 million, he said finally, his voice hollow and strange. It was the first time either of us had spoken since leaving the country club. 52.3 million, I corrected gently. He turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. Fear. Not just surprise or confusion, but genuine terror at the implications of what I had revealed. "How is that possible?" he asked. "You work on a computer in the garage. You make pictures." I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to face him fully. After years of hiding, minimizing, and allowing him to diminish my work, I was finally ready to tell him the complete truth. "I don't just make pictures, Marcus. I create interactive digital experiences using proprietary technology that I developed myself. The pieces respond to viewer input in real time, creating unique, unrepeatable, artistic moments. The technical innovation alone represents 3 years of 18-hour days and collaboration with programmers and digital artists from around the world." He stared at me as though I was speaking a foreign language. "But you never said. I thought it was just a hobby." "You made it very clear that you thought it was just a hobby," I replied. "Every time I tried to explain the complexity of what I was doing, you dismissed it. Every time I mentioned a sale or recognition, you minimized it. After a while, I stopped trying to share my successes with you." The truth was more complicated than that, but it was a place to start. The real story began 3 years ago, when I first discovered the emerging world of NFTs and blockchain-based art. I had been feeling increasingly isolated in my traditional graphic design work, creating marketing materials and corporate brochures that satisfied clients but left me creatively empty. I had stumbled across an article about digital artists selling their work for thousands of dollars using something called non-fungible tokens. The technology was new, controversial, and completely fascinating. Instead of dismissing it as a fad, I had spent 6 months learning everything I could about blockchain technology, smart contracts, and the emerging digital art marketplace. My background in graphic design gave me the technical skills to create sophisticated digital artwork, but I quickly realized that the most successful NFT artists weren't just making pretty pictures. They were creating new forms of artistic expression that could only exist in digital form, using the unique properties of blockchain technology to build scarcity, provenance, and interactivity into their work. I had converted the garage into a proper studio, installing professional lighting, multiple high-end computers, and specialized equipment for creating and displaying digital art. Marcus had barely noticed the transformation, assuming I was simply upgrading my hobby space. When packages arrived containing thousands of dollars worth of software and hardware, he never asked about the cost or the purpose. The learning curve had been steep. I had taught myself programming languages, studied color theory and composition with the intensity of a graduate student, and connected with digital artists and collectors around the world through online communities and virtual galleries. The art world I discovered was unlike anything I had experienced in traditional creative fields. It was global, democratic, and intensely focused on innovation and experimentation. My first sale had been a simple animated piece that I created as an experiment in viewer interactivity. The buyer paid $800, which seemed like a fortune at the time. Marcus had been pleased when I told him, treating it as confirmation that my hobby was finally generating some return on investment. But that first sale had opened doors I hadn't expected. The buyer was a collector who specialized in emerging digital artists, and he shared my work with other collectors and curators. Within 6 months, I was selling pieces regularly for prices that ranged from $2,000 to $8,000 each. More importantly, I was developing a reputation for technical innovation. My pieces weren't just visually striking. They pushed the boundaries of what was possible in digital art. I created works that evolved over time, pieces that responded to external data like weather patterns or stock market fluctuations, and interactive experiences that allowed viewers to influence the artwork in meaningful ways. The pseudonym CD Vision had been necessary from the beginning. The digital art world was small and interconnected, and I didn't want my growing reputation to be complicated by my connection to Marcus and his corporate social circle. I also knew that Marcus would find ways to undermine my confidence if he truly understood the scope of what I was achieving. Under my pseudonym, I was free to take creative risks and engage with the art community as a serious professional. I spoke at conferences about the intersection of technology and creativity. I collaborated with museums on experimental digital exhibitions. I was profiled in art magazines and invited to participate in prestigious virtual galleries. All of this happened in parallel to my life as Marcus's wife in Millbrook Heights, where I continued to play the role of the woman whose creative pursuits were harmless and inconsequential. The compartmentalization had been exhausting, but it had also been necessary for my artistic development. I still don't understand how you went from selling a few pictures to $50 million, Marcus said, his voice heavy with confusion and something that might have been resentment. I looked toward the garage where the lights were still on, from my morning work session. Because I wasn't just selling a few pictures. Over the past 18 months, I was building a coherent body of work that represents a genuine innovation in digital art. The Infinite Moments collection isn't just 57 individual pieces. It's a complete artistic statement that explores human connection and identity in the digital age. The collection had been my most ambitious project, requiring not just artistic vision, but significant technical development. Each piece in the series was designed to interact with the others, creating an ever-evolving network of visual and auditory experiences. Viewers could influence individual works, but their actions also affected the entire collection, creating a living artwork that could never be fully experienced the same way twice. The technical challenges had been immense. I had worked with blockchain developers to create smart contracts that governed the interactions between pieces. I had collaborated with sound designers to create audio elements that responded to visual changes. I had even developed new file formats that could preserve the interactive elements while ensuring the long-term accessibility of the work. But the technology was only the foundation. The real innovation was in how I used these tools to create genuinely moving artistic experiences. Each piece in the collection told part of a larger story about human relationships in an increasingly connected but isolating world. The interactivity wasn't just a gimmick, it was integral to the emotional impact of the work. Artforum called it the most significant development in digital art since the invention of computer graphics, I said quietly. The Museum of Modern Art acquired 3 pieces for their permanent collection. The Tate Modern is planning a solo exhibition next year. Marcus was staring at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. This was information that fundamentally contradicted everything he thought he knew about my work and my capabilities. "But why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Why keep it secret?" The question hung between us, loaded with years of accumulated hurt and disappointment. How could I explain that I had tried to share my growing success, only to have him dismiss each achievement as insignificant? How could I make him understand that his constant minimization of my work had taught me to protect my victories from his need to diminish them? "Do you remember when I sold my first piece for $800? I asked. He nodded uncertainly. "You said it was nice that my hobby was finally paying for itself. When I sold a piece for $5,000 6 months later, you said, "It was probably a fluke." When I was invited to speak at the Digital Art Symposium in New York, you said it was probably just because they needed to fill time slots. Each memory was sharp and clear. Moments when I had reached for his support and enthusiasm only to have my achievements reduced to accidents or anomalies. Every time I tried to share good news with you, you found a way to make it smaller. I continued. After a while, I learned to keep my successes to myself, rather than risk having them diminished. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing not just the financial implications of my revelation, but the relationship implications as well. For 15 years, he had been the successful one, the breadwinner whose achievements mattered. I had been the supportive spouse whose contributions were decorative and optional. Now, suddenly, I was not just financially successful, but professionally recognized in ways that his corporate achievements could never match. My work was being studied in universities and displayed in museums. I had created something genuinely new and valuable that would outlast any quarterly report or business deal. $52 million, he repeated, as though saying it again might make it more comprehensible. The money is just one measure of success, I said. What matters more to me is that I've created something meaningful, something that pushes the boundaries of what art can be and do. But even as I said it, I knew the money mattered too. Not because of what it could buy, but because of what it represented. Financial independence, the ability to make choices, based on my values rather than economic necessity. The freedom to pursue my artistic vision without worrying about practical considerations. More than that, the money was proof of value that even Marcus couldn't dismiss or minimize. He might not understand the artistic merit of my work, but he understood wealth and success in concrete terms. $52 million was a language. He spoke fluently, a form of achievement he couldn't pretend was accidental or insignificant. We sat in the car for another few minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The neighborhood around us was quiet and peaceful, the kind of suburban tranquility that had once represented security and success. Now it felt small and confining. Like a stage set for a play I was no longer interested in performing. "I need to see it," Marcus said finally. "The studio, the work. I need to understand what you've been doing." I nodded, recognizing that this moment had been inevitable from the moment I decided to reveal my success. There would be no more secrets, no more compartmentalization. Marcus was about to see the full scope of what I had built while he thought I was playing with computer doodles in the garage. We walked up the driveway together, past the flower boxes, and painted shutters that had hidden my transformation for 3 years. As I unlocked the studio door, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This space had been my sanctuary, my private world where I could explore ideas and take creative risks without judgment or interference. The door swung open to reveal a space that bore no resemblance to a hobby room or casual art studio. Professional. Lighting illuminated multiple workstations equipped with high-end computers and specialized monitors, capable of displaying the full color spectrum required for professional digital art. The walls were lined with reference materials, technical, manuals, and printed samples of my work. A large presentation screen dominated one wall, currently displaying the opening sequence of the Infinite Moments collection. Marcus stepped inside and stopped, turning slowly to take in the sophistication of the setup. This wasn't the amateur enthusiast space he had imagined. It was clearly the workshop of a serious professional, equipped with tools and technology that represented a significant investment of both money and expertise. "This is what you've been doing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I moved to the main computer and began pulling up files, showing him pieces from the collection that had just sold. On the large monitor, colors shifted and flowed in response to my input, creating patterns that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own internal rhythm. Each piece is essentially a computer program designed to create unique visual experiences. I explained, manipulating the interface to demonstrate the interactive elements. But instead of serving a utilitarian function, the programs are designed to evoke emotional responses and explore philosophical questions about consciousness, connection, and identity. I showed him how viewers could influence the artwork through various inputs, how the pieces responded to external data streams, and how the entire collection formed an interconnected network of visual and auditory experiences. The technical complexity was staggering, representing thousands of hours of programming and artistic development. "I don't understand any of this," Marcus said, but his tone had changed. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something approaching awe. "How did you learn to do this?" "The same way anyone learns anything complex," I replied. "Study, practice, collaboration, and years of dedicated work. I taught myself programming languages, studied color theory and composition, worked with technical consultants, and connected with other artists pushing similar boundaries." As I spoke, I realized that this was the conversation I had wanted to have with him for 3 years. Not the defensive explanations of why my work mattered, but the excited sharing of technical breakthroughs and creative discoveries. The chance to show him the depth and sophistication of what I had been building. But it had taken $52 million to get his attention. Marcus spent the next hour asking questions and watching demonstrations, his corporate mind clearly struggling to process the artistic and technical complexity of what I had created. He understood business metrics and financial projections, but the idea of art as both creative expression and technological innovation was foreign to his worldview. "The buyers," he said finally. "Who pays $50 million for computer files?" I pulled up the documentation from the sale, showing him the list of acquiring institutions and private collectors. Museums, technology companies, and wealthy individuals from around the world had participated in the acquisition, each drawn by different aspects of the collection's innovation and artistic merit. "The same people who pay millions for paintings and sculptures," I said. "The difference is that digital art represents the future of creative expression. We're still in the early stages of understanding what's possible when you combine artistic vision with advanced technology." Marcus studied the acquisition documents with the focused attention he usually reserved for financial reports. I could see him calculating the implications, not just of my current success, but of my potential for future earnings. "This isn't going to be your only collection," he said, and it wasn't really a question. "No," I confirmed. "I have 3 more major projects in development, and there's already significant collector interest based on the success of Infinite Moments." For the first time since we had left the country club, Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the warm, proud smile of a supportive spouse celebrating their partner's achievement. It was the calculating smile of someone recognizing a valuable business opportunity. That smile told me everything I needed to know about what would happen next. Marcus wasn't going to apologize for years of dismissing my work or acknowledge the damage his attitude had caused. Instead, he was going to try to position himself as a supportive partner who had always believed in my potential. The money had changed everything between us, but not in the way I had hoped. Instead of earning his respect for my artistic achievements, I had simply moved myself from one category to another in his mental framework. I was no longer the wife with expensive hobbies. I was now the wife with valuable assets. As we walked back to the house that night, I realized that revealing my success had solved one problem while creating several others. Marcus could no longer dismiss my work as insignificant, but his sudden interest felt opportunistic rather than genuine. The respect I had craved for so long was finally being offered, but it was based on financial value rather than artistic merit. The foundation of our relationship had shifted in ways that we were both still trying to understand. But one thing was certain. There would be no going back to the old dynamic where Marcus's achievements mattered and mine were merely decorative. The balance of power had changed permanently, and neither of us was quite sure what that meant for our future together. The transformation began immediately. Over the next 72 hours, I watched Marcus cycle through emotions like a man trying on different personalities, searching for the one that would best serve his interests in our new reality. Monday morning brought contrition, carefully, delivered over coffee and croissants that he had personally prepared, a gesture so unusual that it felt more like a performance than genuine thoughtfulness. "I've been thinking about Saturday night," he said, settling into the chair across from me with an expression of practiced sincerity. "I owe you an apology, Claire. I clearly didn't understand the scope of what you were achieving." I sipped my coffee and waited for the inevitable qualifier, the but, that would allow him to acknowledge my success while absolving himself of responsibility for years of dismissive behavior. "I suppose I was so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I didn't recognize when protection became discouragement," he continued, his tone carefully modulated to suggest good intentions rather than deliberate undermining. There it was. The narrative that would allow him to reframe his behavior as misguided support rather than systematic diminishment. I had heard similar explanations from him before, whenever his actions were called into question. Marcus had perfected the art of acknowledging problems while avoiding accountability. "I see," I said neutrally, refusing to make his redemption easy. He shifted in his chair, clearly expecting more enthusiasm for his offered apology. "I think we should celebrate properly. Maybe dinner at Le Bernardin this weekend? I could make some calls, see if we can get a good table." Le Bernardin, the restaurant we had visited exactly twice in 15 years of marriage, both times to celebrate Marcus's promotions. It was his default gesture for occasions he deemed worthy of expensive recognition, a place where the exclusivity of the reservation was almost as important as the quality of the food. "That's thoughtful," I replied. "But I'm not sure I'll be available this weekend. I have several conference calls scheduled with galleries and collectors who want to discuss future projects." This was true, though the calls were scheduled for my convenience rather than theirs. The success of Infinite Moments had created immediate demand for my next collection, and I was fielding inquiries from institutions and collectors around the world. My calendar for the next month was already fuller than it had been in years. Marcus's expression flickered with something that might have been irritation before settling back into supportive understanding. "Of course, business first. Maybe we can find time later in the month." But I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. In the old dynamic, my schedule would have been automatically subordinate to his plans. If Marcus wanted to celebrate with dinner at an expensive restaurant, I would have rearranged whatever conflicts existed to accommodate his timeline. Now, suddenly, my professional commitments took precedence, and he was the one adjusting his expectations. Tuesday brought a different approach. Marcus arrived home from work with a bouquet of white orchids and a bottle of Dom Pérignon, the kind of grand gesture he typically reserved for impressing clients or celebrating major business deals. "I thought we should toast your incredible achievement," he announced, setting the flowers on the kitchen counter with a flourish. $52 million, Claire. It's extraordinary." I accepted the flowers graciously while noting that this was the first time he had used the word extraordinary to describe any aspect of my work. For 3 years, my digital art had been nice, or interesting, or a good way to stay busy. The transformation of his vocabulary was as sudden as it was transparent. "Thank you," I said, arranging the orchids in a vase. "They're beautiful. I've been telling everyone at the office about your success," he continued, popping the cork on the champagne with practiced ease. "David from Investment Management wants to know if you'd be interested in discussing portfolio strategies for managing sudden wealth. Stephanie from Tax Planning thinks we should schedule a meeting to discuss the implications for our returns." I paused in my flower arranging, recognizing the familiar pattern of Marcus inserting himself into situations where he might claim some credit or control. Within 48 hours of learning about my success, he was already positioning himself as my financial advisor and career manager. "I appreciate the offers," I said carefully, "but I already have financial advisors and tax specialists who understand the art market. Tony Castellano recommended them when we were structuring the sale." Marcus's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Tony Castellano was the art advisor who had coordinated the acquisition of my collection, a man whose expertise and connections Marcus couldn't match or replicate. The existence of an entire professional support system that Marcus knew nothing about was clearly unsettling to him. "Of course," he said, pouring champagne into 2 crystal flutes. "Though it might be worth getting a second opinion from people who understand our broader financial picture." Our broader financial picture. The phrase was carefully chosen to suggest shared assets and joint decision-making, when in reality Marcus knew almost nothing about my income, expenses, or financial planning over the past 3 years. I had kept my art-related finances completely separate from our joint accounts, partly out of habit, and partly out of a growing awareness that financial independence might someday prove important. "I'll consider it," I said, accepting the champagne. Flute he offered. Wednesday brought the most telling transformation yet. Marcus emerged from his home office that evening with a stack of printouts and a yellow legal pad covered with notes, the kind of preparation he typically brought to important business presentations. "I've been doing some research," he announced, spreading the papers across our dining room table with the organized precision of a consultant preparing a client pitch. "The digital art market is fascinating, much more sophisticated than I realized." I examined the papers he had assembled, printouts from art market websites, analysis of NFT sales data, profiles of successful digital artists, and what appeared to be a comprehensive overview of blockchain technology and its applications in creative industries. Marcus had clearly spent considerable time educating himself about my field, something he had never bothered to do in 3 years of living with my work. "This is impressive research," I said, meaning it sincerely while also recognizing the implications of its timing. "I think there are significant opportunities here," Marcus continued, settling into what I recognized as his business development mode. "The market is still emerging, which means early positioning could be extremely valuable. Have you considered developing a more systematic approach to production and marketing?" I set down my wine glass and studied his earnest expression. "What kind of systematic approach?" "Well, look at this," he said, pointing to a chart showing NFT sales volumes over the past year. "There are clear patterns in what sells and what doesn't. Price points, artistic styles, marketing strategies. If we could analyze your most successful pieces and identify the common elements, we could potentially optimize future production for maximum market impact." The word "we" hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, pleasant-smelling but ultimately toxic. Marcus was proposing to apply business analytics to my artistic process, to reduce the creative exploration and emotional authenticity of my work, to market research and profit optimization. "Art isn't really a systematic process," I said gently. "The pieces that resonate most strongly are usually the ones that come from genuine creative impulses, rather than market calculations." "But surely there's room for both," Marcus replied, his enthusiasm undimmed by my lukewarm response. "Creative integrity and smart business practices don't have to be mutually exclusive. Some of the most successful artists in history were also savvy about marketing and positioning." He wasn't wrong, exactly. Many great artists had been thoughtful about the commercial aspects of their work. But Marcus's sudden interest in optimizing my artistic production felt less like supportive partnership and more like a hostile takeover attempt. "I'll think about it," I said, using the same diplomatic non-commitment I had offered to his previous suggestions. But that night, lying in bed while Marcus slept beside me, I found myself thinking about more than just his business proposals. I was thinking about the fundamental shift that had occurred in our relationship dynamic and what it meant for our future together. For 15 years, Marcus had been the primary breadwinner, the spouse whose career took precedence when we made major decisions. Where we lived, how we spent our money, which social events we attended, even how we allocated our time. All of these choices had been implicitly structured around supporting Marcus's professional advancement and maintaining his position in the corporate hierarchy that defined our social world. I had accepted this arrangement partly because it seemed natural, and partly because I lacked the financial independence to challenge it effectively. Even when I was working as a graphic designer, my income was significantly less than Marcus's, which gave him de facto authority over major decisions. When I transitioned to freelance work and then to digital art, the income differential became even more pronounced, effectively cementing his role as the decision-maker in our household. Now suddenly those roles had reversed. My artistic work had generated more wealth than Marcus would earn in his entire career, and my professional reputation was growing in ways that transcended simple financial success. Museums were acquiring my work for their permanent collections. Universities were developing curricula around the techniques I had pioneered. I was being invited to speak at conferences and contribute to academic publications about the future of digital art. Marcus's corporate success, while significant within his industry, couldn't compete with that kind of cultural impact. He could make senior vice president or even partner at Pinnacle Financial, but he would never create something that fundamentally changed how people thought about creativity and technology. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time in our marriage, I had the financial freedom to make choices based on my own values and priorities rather than economic necessity. I could pursue artistic projects that interested me regardless of their commercial viability. I could travel, collaborate with other artists, even relocate to a different city if it would advance my creative development. But I could also end my marriage. The thought arrived unbidden and unwelcome, but once it had formed, I couldn't dismiss it. The money had given me options I had never possessed before, including the option to leave a relationship that had become increasingly unsatisfying and constraining. I wasn't ready to make that choice yet, but the knowledge that I could make it changed everything. Marcus's sudden attentiveness and interest in my work felt different when viewed through the lens of financial independence. His apologies seemed more strategic than sincere, his suggestions more controlling than collaborative. Thursday morning brought confirmation of my growing suspicions about Marcus's motivations. I was working in my studio when he appeared in the doorway with his laptop and a cup of coffee, settling into the spare chair I kept for the rare occasions when I had visitors. "Do you mind if I work out here this morning?" he asked with studied casualness. "The lighting is better than my office, and I need to review some presentations." I glanced up from my computer, where I was developing preliminary concepts for my next collection. Marcus had never shown any interest in spending time in my studio, had barely set foot in the space until 3 days earlier. His sudden desire to work alongside me felt less like companionship and more like surveillance. "Of course," I said, curious to see what he was actually planning to do. For the next hour, Marcus made a show of working on his laptop while periodically asking questions about my process, my technology, and my plans for future projects. The questions were casual and apparently innocent, but I recognized the pattern from his business development work. He was conducting research, gathering information that could be useful for his own purposes. "The interactive elements are particularly impressive," he said during one such interruption. "Have you considered licensing the technology to other artists or institutions?" I saved my work and turned to face him directly. "Marcus, what are you really doing here?" He looked up from his laptop with an expression of innocent confusion. "I'm working and learning about your process. I thought you'd appreciate the interest." "Your interest seems very focused on the commercial applications of my work," I observed. Are you planning to propose some kind of business partnership? Marcus closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, apparently recognizing that subtlety was no longer serving his purposes. I think there are opportunities here that you might not be seeing. Your artistic vision is extraordinary, but business development isn't your area of expertise. We could be a powerful team if we combined your creative talents with my strategic thinking. There it was. The proposal I had been expecting since Tuesday night, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed he was offering me something valuable rather than trying to claim ownership of my success. What kind of partnership did you have in mind? I asked, genuinely curious about how he would frame his proposal. I could handle the business side while you focus on the creative work, Marcus said, warming to his pitch. Marketing, negotiation, strategic planning, relationship management, all the aspects that take time away from your artistic development. It was a reasonable-sounding proposal that would have positioned Marcus as my business manager and given him significant control over my career and finances. From his perspective, it probably seemed like a generous offer to share his expertise and connections for our mutual benefit. From my perspective, it looked like an attempt to insert himself into my success story and claim partial credit for achievements he had previously dismissed as worthless. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I already have professional representation for those aspects of my career. Tony Castellano and his team handle marketing and sales, and I have legal and financial advisors who specialize in art market transactions. Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing a flash of frustration before settling back into supportive understanding. Of course, though it might be worth considering whether outside representation really understands your best interests the way family would. Family. The word was loaded with implications about loyalty, shared interests, and mutual obligation. Marcus was suggesting that blood relation made him more trustworthy than experienced professionals, despite having no relevant expertise and a track record of dismissing my work. I'll think about it, I said, returning to my computer screen, in a gesture of polite dismissal. But Marcus didn't take the hint. Instead, he reopened his laptop and continued his surveillance, asking questions and taking notes while maintaining the pretense of working on his own projects. I found his presence increasingly distracting and intrusive, but I wasn't ready for the confrontation that asking him to leave would inevitably provoke. That afternoon, while Marcus was at the office, I called Rachel Kim and asked if she could meet for coffee. Rachel had been the only person at the country club who had genuinely understood and appreciated my work, and I needed perspective from someone who wasn't financially or emotionally invested in my success. We met at a small cafe in downtown, Millbrook Heights, a place where we could speak privately without running into other members of our social circle. Rachel arrived with her usual punctuality and professional composure, though I detected a hint of excitement in her expression. So, she said, settling into the booth across from me with her latte, $52 million. I have to admit, even I didn't see that coming. I laughed for what felt like the first time in days. Neither did I, completely. I knew the collection was strong, but the final sale price exceeded even my most optimistic projections. How is Marcus handling it? Rachel asked, and her tone suggested she already suspected the answer might be complicated. I spent the next 20 minutes describing Marcus's transformation over the past week, from his careful apologies to his business, proposals to his sudden interest in spending time in my studio. Rachel listened without interruption, occasionally nodding in recognition of patterns she had undoubtedly seen in other relationships. "He's trying to reposition himself," she said when I finished. Classic behavior when power dynamics shift. Suddenly. Instead of acknowledging that he misread the situation, he's trying to insert himself into your success story as though he always believed in your potential. That's what it feels like, I confirmed. But maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe he genuinely wants to be supportive now that he understands what I've been working toward. Rachel studied my expression with the analytical intensity that made her Such an effective technology executive. Do you believe that? Based on 15 years of marriage, does Marcus's behavior this week feel genuinely supportive or strategically motivated? The question forced me to confront something I had been avoiding. Marcus's sudden transformation felt performative rather than authentic, driven by his recognition of changed circumstances rather than genuine appreciation for my artistic achievements. Strategically motivated, I admitted. Then you need to decide what you want to do about it, Rachel said gently. The money has given you options you didn't have before. You can stay in the marriage and work to rebuild it on more equitable terms, or you can use your newfound independence to explore other possibilities. The phrase encompassed everything from career opportunities to geographic relocation to ending my marriage entirely. For the first time in my adult life, I had the financial freedom to make choices based on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford. I'm not ready to make any major decisions yet, I said, but I think I need to establish some boundaries about how we move forward. Rachel nodded approvingly. Boundaries are good, especially with someone who's used to being in control and is suddenly facing a very different dynamic. We talked for another hour about practical considerations and relationship strategies, and by the time I returned home, I had developed a clearer sense of how I wanted to handle Marcus's transformation. I wouldn't be cruel or dismissive, but I also wouldn't allow him to claim ownership of my success or control over my future decisions. The conversation I needed to have with Marcus wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Our relationship had reached a crossroads, and the direction we chose would determine whether we could build something genuinely equitable together or whether my newfound independence would ultimately lead us in different directions. That evening, I began preparing for the most important negotiation of my marriage. Friday arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in Millbrook Heights, sunlight streaming through our kitchen windows as I prepared what would become the most consequential breakfast conversation of our marriage. Marcus sat at the island, scrolling through his phone while absently consuming the steel-cut oats I had prepared. His attention focused on financial news and market reports that suddenly seemed smaller and less significant than they had a week earlier. I had spent most of the previous night rehearsing what I needed to say, finding the balance between honesty and kindness that would allow us to move forward with clarity rather than resentment. The revelation at the country club had changed the fundamental dynamics of our relationship, but we hadn't yet addressed what that transformation meant for our future together. Marcus, I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. We need to have a serious conversation about where we go from here. He looked up from his phone, and I saw him register the gravity in my tone. Over 15 years of marriage, he had learned to recognize the difference between casual discussion and significant dialogue, and something in my expression clearly signaled that this would be the latter. Of course, he said, setting aside his phone and giving me his full attention for the first time in days. What's on your mind? I had decided to begin with appreciation rather than criticism, to acknowledge the positive aspects of our relationship, before addressing the problems that needed to be resolved. I want you to know that I value what we've built together, I began, choosing my words carefully. 15 years of marriage means something, and I don't want to dismiss the good things. We've shared simply because we're facing some challenges now. Marcus nodded, though I could see tension gathering in his shoulders as he prepared for whatever criticism might follow my diplomatic opening. But I also need you to understand that something fundamental has changed between us, I continued. Not just because of the money, but because of how the past week has revealed some patterns in our relationship that I can no longer ignore. What kind of patterns? He asked, though his defensive tone suggested he already suspected where this conversation was heading. I took a breath and committed to complete honesty. For 3 years, I tried to share my growing success with you. Small victories at first, then larger ones. Each time, you found ways to minimize my achievements or dismiss them as accidents or flukes. You trained me to stop expecting support or enthusiasm from you, so I learned to protect my successes by keeping them private. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to indicate I wasn't finished. Now that the financial success is too large to dismiss or minimize, you've suddenly become interested in my work. But your interest seems focused on how you can benefit from it rather than celebrating what I've accomplished independently. That's not fair, Claire, Marcus said, his voice carrying the wounded tone he typically used when his motives were questioned. I made mistakes in how I responded to your work, but I'm trying to be supportive now. I thought you'd want me to take an interest. I do want you to take an interest, I replied. But the interest needs to be genuine, not strategic. When you propose business partnerships or suggest ways to optimize my artistic process for market success, it feels like you're trying to claim ownership of something you previously considered worthless. The words hung between us, more direct and confrontational than our usual pattern of diplomatic conflict avoidance. But the money had given me the courage to speak truths I had been suppressing for years. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the implications of what I was saying. His entire identity was built around being the successful partner, the provider, the decision-maker, whose judgment guided our major choices. My sudden financial independence threatened all of those roles simultaneously. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "I want you to acknowledge that you were wrong about my work," I said. "Not just mistaken or protective, but genuinely wrong in your assessment of its value and potential. I want you to recognize that your dismissive attitude caused real damage to our relationship and to my confidence as an artist." Marcus stared into his coffee cup, his jaw working as he processed my request. Admitting error had never been one of his strengths, particularly when the admission would require acknowledging that his judgment had been seriously flawed. "And I want you to understand that moving forward, my career decisions will be mine to make," I continued. "I appreciate your interest in being helpful, but I won't be accepting your business proposals or management suggestions. I have professional advisors who understand the art market, and I'm capable of making strategic decisions about my own work." This was the heart of the matter, the establishment of boundaries that would allow us to rebuild our relationship on more equitable terms. Marcus could choose to accept these new parameters or reject them, but he couldn't pretend they didn't exist. "So, where does that leave us?" Marcus asked, and for the first time since Saturday night, his voice carried genuine vulnerability rather than calculated charm. "That depends on what you choose to do with this information," I replied. "You can accept that our dynamic has changed and work to build something more balanced, or you can continue trying to reassert control and find yourself increasingly frustrated as I make decisions independently." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring out the kitchen window at the garden where I had spent countless hours thinking through artistic problems and creative challenges. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "You're right about some things," he said slowly. "I didn't understand what you were building, and I probably discouraged you when I should have been supportive, but I'm not sure you're being fair about my motivations now." "Explain what you mean," I said, genuinely curious about his perspective. "When someone you love suddenly achieves extraordinary success, it's natural to want to be part of that success," Marcus said. "Not to claim credit, but to contribute in whatever way you can. Maybe I went about it wrong, but the impulse came from wanting to share in your achievement, not control it." It was a more thoughtful response than I had expected, and I could hear genuine emotion beneath his careful phrasing. But it also revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that would need to be addressed before we could move forward. "The problem is that you want to share in the success without having shared in the struggle," I said gently. "For 3 years, I worked 18-hour days, taught myself new technologies, connected with artists and collectors around the world, and built a reputation entirely on my own. You didn't just fail to support that process. You actively undermined my confidence by dismissing it as unimportant." Marcus flinched at the directness of my assessment, but he didn't argue with its accuracy. Now that the work has proven valuable, you want to become my partner and advisor, I continued. But partnership requires mutual respect and shared sacrifice, not just shared benefits. You can't skip the hard parts and show up for the rewards. So what are you saying? Marcus asked. That there's no path forward for us? I'm saying that if you want to be part of my success going forward, you need to earn that privilege through genuine support and respect for my autonomy, I replied. Not through business proposals or management strategies, but through acknowledging my capabilities and trusting my judgment. We talked for another hour, working through the practical implications of our changed dynamic. Marcus would stop proposing business partnerships and strategic interventions. I would make my own decisions about future projects, representation, and career direction. We would both work to rebuild trust and communication, but on the understanding that our relationship was now between equals rather than between a primary breadwinner and a dependent spouse. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a foundation for moving forward. Marcus agreed to the boundaries I had established, though I could see him struggling with the loss of control and influence that those boundaries represented. For my part, I committed to being open about my work and decisions while maintaining my right to make choices independently. The conversation concluded with a tentative peace rather than a triumphant reconciliation, but it felt like progress nonetheless. We had addressed the fundamental issues directly rather than allowing them to fester beneath the surface of polite accommodation. That afternoon, while Marcus was at the office, I received a call that would test our new understanding sooner than expected. Tony Castellano was calling with news about an opportunity that would require a significant decision about my future direction. "Claire, I hope you're sitting down," Tony said, his voice carrying the excitement of someone delivering extraordinary news. "I just received a call from the Guggenheim. They want to discuss a major solo exhibition for next year, potentially your largest showing to date." I felt my pulse quicken as Tony described the proposal. The Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum was offering me a 6-month solo exhibition that would occupy their entire contemporary gallery space. The show would feature not only existing works, but also several new pieces created specifically for the museum's unique architecture. It would be accompanied by a major catalog, an educational program, and international publicity that could establish me as one of the most important digital artists of my generation. "The timeline is aggressive," Tony continued. "They want to finalize the agreement within 2 weeks, and the new pieces would need to be completed within 8 months. It would require an enormous commitment of time and energy, but the career impact would be transformational." I spent 20 minutes discussing the details with Tony, exploring the technical requirements, the creative opportunities, and the logistical challenges of such an ambitious project. By the time we concluded the call, I knew I wanted to accept the exhibition offer, but I also knew it would require significant changes to my life and schedule. The Guggenheim project would demand my complete artistic focus for the better part of a year. I would need to travel frequently for planning meetings and technical consultations. I might even need to relocate temporarily to New York to oversee the installation and opening events. It was exactly the kind of career-defining opportunity that Marcus and I would have discussed extensively under our old dynamic, with his input weighing heavily in my decision-making process. Under our new arrangement, however, the choice was mine to make independently. When Marcus returned home that evening, I was already deep into preliminary sketches for the Guggenheim pieces, exploring how my interactive digital work might respond to the museum's famous spiral architecture. He found me in the studio, surrounded by reference materials and technical specifications, working with the kind of focused intensity that had produced my most successful pieces. "Big project?" he asked, settling into the spare chair with genuine curiosity, rather than the investigative agenda that had characterized his recent visits to my workspace. "Potentially," I replied, saving my work and turning to face him. "The Guggenheim wants to do a major solo exhibition. 6 months. The entire contemporary gallery space. New pieces created specifically for their architecture. Marcus's eyebrows rose in recognition of the significance of such an offer. The Guggenheim was one of the most prestigious museums in the world, and a solo exhibition there would represent the kind of career achievement that most artists could only dream about. "That's incredible, Claire," he said, and for the first time in years, his enthusiasm seemed completely genuine. "When would it happen?" "Next year, if I accept," I said. "The timeline is aggressive, and it would require significant changes to how I work and where I spend my time. I might need to be in New York for extended periods during the installation and opening." I watched Marcus process the implications of what I was describing. A year-long project that would require frequent travel and potentially temporary relocation represented exactly the kind of major life decision that we would have made together under our old arrangement. Now I was presenting it as information rather than seeking his permission or approval. "Are you going to accept?" he asked, and I could hear him working to keep any hint of expectation or pressure out of his voice. "Yes," I said simply. "It's an extraordinary opportunity, and the artistic challenges are exactly what I want to be exploring right now." Marcus nodded slowly, and I could see him adjusting to the reality that I had made a decision that would significantly impact both of our lives without consulting him in the traditional sense. "Is there anything I can do to support the project?" he asked carefully. The question represented exactly the kind of supportive partnership I had been hoping he might be capable of. Instead of trying to manage or control my decision, he was asking how he could help me succeed on my own terms. "Actually, yes," I said, feeling a spark of hope about our potential to rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations. "The project will require a lot of travel and some irregular schedules. Having your support and understanding during that process would mean a great deal to me." "You have it," Marcus said without hesitation. "This is your moment, Claire. I want you to make the most of it." For the first time in days, his words felt completely sincere rather than strategically calculated. It was a small moment, but it suggested that Marcus might be capable of the genuine partnership I had been seeking. The evening proceeded with more ease and authentic communication than we had shared in months. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the technical challenges of adapting my work to the Guggenheim space, and I found myself explaining my artistic vision with the enthusiasm I usually reserved for conversations with fellow artists or curators. As we prepared for bed that night, I felt cautiously optimistic about our ability to navigate this new phase of our relationship. The boundaries I had established that morning seemed to be creating space for more genuine interaction rather than the strategic maneuvering that had characterized Marcus's behavior over the past week. But the real test would come over the following months, as the demands of the Guggenheim project required me to make numerous independent decisions about travel, scheduling, and creative priorities. Our conversation had established the framework for moving forward, but the actual work of rebuilding trust and communication was only beginning. The money had given me the freedom to pursue opportunities like the Guggenheim exhibition without worrying about financial consequences. But it had also forced both Marcus and me to confront fundamental questions about power, respect, and autonomy in our marriage. The answers to those questions would determine whether our relationship could evolve to accommodate my transformed circumstances, or whether my newfound independence would ultimately lead us in different directions. As I fell asleep that night, I felt grateful for the clarity that had emerged from our difficult conversation, even though I knew the hardest work lay ahead. The revelation of my success had exposed problems that had been festering beneath the surface of our relationship for years, but it had also created opportunities for growth and change that hadn't existed before. Whether Marcus and I could build something stronger and more equitable from the ruins of our old dynamic remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the possibility of authentic partnership based on mutual respect, rather than economic dependency. The morning would bring new challenges and decisions. but I would face them from a position of strength and clarity that my artistic success had made possible. The woman who had hidden her achievements to avoid Marcus's dismissive responses was gone, replaced by someone confident enough to claim her space and demand the respect her work had earned. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid for whatever came next. Part 4. The Revelation. 3 weeks later, I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Pinnacle Tower, waiting to meet Marcus for what he had described as an important lunch with key colleagues. The invitation had arrived that morning via text message, casual and brief, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't simply another routine business meal. I had spent the morning in my studio, working on preliminary concepts for the Guggenheim exhibition, when Marcus called to ask if I could join him downtown for lunch. The request was unusual. He rarely invited me to business-related events, and when he did, the invitations came with much more advance notice and detailed explanations. Nothing formal, he had assured me over the phone. Just a few people from the office who are curious to meet the artist behind all the headlines. Headlines. The word had caught my attention because it suggested that news of my success had spread beyond our immediate social circle. When I pressed him for details, Marcus had been evasive, saying only that word was getting around and people were interested in learning more about my work. Now, standing in the marble-clad lobby of Pinnacle Financial's headquarters, I was beginning to suspect that Marcus's casual lunch invitation might be something more calculated than he had suggested. The building hummed with the kind of expensive energy that came from concentrating significant wealth and power in a single location, and I felt underdressed despite having chosen my outfit carefully. Marcus appeared from the elevator bank at precisely noon, dressed in his best suit and wearing the confident smile he reserved for important client meetings. He embraced me warmly, but I detected a nervousness beneath his polished exterior that suggested this lunch was more significant than he had initially indicated. "You look beautiful," he said, stepping back to assess my appearance with the critical eye he typically reserved for business presentations. "Perfect choice for today." The comment confirmed my suspicion that this lunch was being staged for a specific purpose, though I still wasn't certain what that purpose might be. Marcus had clearly given thought to how I should be presented to whoever we were meeting, which suggested that my appearance at this lunch was intended to accomplish something beyond casual social interaction. "Who exactly are we meeting?" I asked as we walked toward the elevator. "Senior partners mostly," Marcus replied, his tone carrying the studied casualness that meant he was omitting important details. "People who have been following your success with great interest." The elevator carried us to the 37th floor, where Pinnacle Financial's executive dining room occupied a corner space with panoramic views of the city. The room was elegant in the understated way that signaled serious money: thick carpets, dark wood paneling, and artwork that had clearly been selected by professional consultants rather than personal taste. A small group was already assembled, around a table set for 8, and I recognized several faces from various social events over the years. These were the senior partners and managing directors who represented the top tier of Pinnacle's hierarchy, people whose approval and support were crucial to Marcus's continued advancement within the firm. "Claire, you remember Jonathan Webster," Marcus said, introducing me to a distinguished man in his 60s whom I recalled from several charity galas. Jonathan was one of Pinnacle's founding partners, with a reputation for both financial acumen and cultural sophistication. "Of course," I replied, accepting Jonathan's warm handshake. "Wonderful to see you again." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Jonathan said with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. "I have to confess, I've been following your artistic success with tremendous interest. Marcus has been keeping us updated on your achievements." This was news to me. Marcus had never mentioned discussing my work with his colleagues, and I wondered what version of my success story he had been sharing with the Pinnacle leadership team. As we were seated and introductions continued around the table, I began to understand the true purpose of this lunch. Each person present held significant influence within Pinnacle Financial, and several made comments suggesting they had been briefed extensively about my recent sale and upcoming Guggenheim exhibition. $52 million, said Patricia Chen, a managing director who specialized in high-net-worth client relationships. In the art world, that represents serious institutional recognition. Museums and collectors don't invest at that level, unless they're confident about long-term cultural significance. The technology aspects are particularly fascinating, added Robert Walsh, whose wealth management division served many of the region's most affluent families. Digital art represents the intersection of creativity and innovation in ways that traditional media simply can't match. I found myself engaged in an increasingly sophisticated conversation about art market trends, the role of technology in contemporary creativity, and the investment potential of digital assets. These weren't casual questions from people making polite conversation. They were informed inquiries from financial professionals who had clearly researched my work and its market positioning. As the conversation progressed, I began to realize that Marcus had orchestrated this lunch for reasons that went beyond simple social introduction. The questions being asked and the expertise being demonstrated suggested that Pinnacle Financial might be considering some kind of business opportunity related to my artistic success. "We've been discussing the possibility of developing an art investment fund," Jonathan said during the main course, confirming my growing suspicions about the meeting's true purpose. Digital assets represent an emerging market with significant growth potential, but most traditional investors lack the expertise to evaluate opportunities effectively. Patricia leaned forward with obvious interest. "Someone with your reputation and connections could provide invaluable guidance for that kind of initiative. The combination of artistic insight and market knowledge would be essential for success." I glanced at Marcus, who was maintaining a carefully neutral expression while clearly monitoring my reaction to what was being proposed. He had positioned this lunch as a casual social gathering, but it was actually a business development meeting designed to explore my potential involvement in a Pinnacle Financial venture. "That sounds like a fascinating project," I said diplomatically, "but I should mention that I already have established relationships with galleries and advisory services for my own work." "Of course," Robert said smoothly. "We wouldn't be proposing anything that would conflict with your existing representation. This would be more about leveraging your expertise to help other investors navigate the digital art market." The conversation continued for another hour, with various partners outlining their vision for an art investment fund that would combine Pinnacle's financial resources with expert curatorial guidance. The opportunity was presented as mutually beneficial. Pinnacle would gain access to an emerging market, while I would receive substantial compensation for my advisory role and potential equity participation in successful investments. It was, objectively, an impressive business proposition that could generate significant additional income while establishing me as a thought leader in the intersection of art and finance. Under different circumstances, I might have been interested in exploring the opportunity further, but the circumstances weren't different. This was Marcus's workplace, and this meeting was Marcus's initiative, presented to me without advance warning or full disclosure about its purpose. The entire proposition felt like another attempt to insert himself into my success story, this time by positioning himself as the architect of a lucrative business opportunity. "This is clearly something that deserves careful consideration," I said as the lunch concluded. "I appreciate you sharing the concept with me, and I'd be happy to discuss it further once I've had time to think through the implications." Jonathan handed me his business card with obvious satisfaction. "Please don't hesitate to reach out when you're ready to explore next steps. We believe this could be a transformative opportunity for everyone involved." The elevator ride back to the lobby was silent, with Marcus clearly waiting for my reaction to what had just transpired. I remained quiet until we reached the street, where the bustle of downtown pedestrian traffic provided cover for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "That was interesting," I said neutrally as we walked toward the parking garage where I had left my car. I thought you might find it intriguing, Marcus replied, his tone carefully enthusiastic without being pushy. It's exactly the kind of opportunity that could leverage your expertise in ways that go beyond individual artistic projects. We had reached my car before I felt ready to address what had really happened during that lunch. Marcus stood beside the driver's door, clearly expecting detailed discussion of the business proposition and my thoughts about potential collaboration with Pinnacle Financial. Marcus, I said, turning to face him directly, when you invited me to lunch this morning, you described it as a casual meal with colleagues who were curious about my work. That's essentially what it was, Marcus replied, though his defensive tone suggested he recognized the inadequacy of that characterization. No, it wasn't, I said firmly. It was a business development meeting designed to recruit me for a specific commercial venture. You misrepresented the purpose of the lunch and put me in a position where I was being pitched a business proposition without any advance preparation or warning. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that his strategy had been exposed but apparently hoping he could still salvage the situation with explanations and justifications. I thought if you knew the full agenda in advance, you might not come, he admitted. But once you heard the proposal, I was confident you'd see the potential. That's exactly the problem, I replied. You made strategic decisions about how to present me to your colleagues without consulting me about my comfort level or interest in that kind of exposure. You used my success as a prop for your own professional advancement without considering whether I wanted to be involved. The accusation hung between us, more direct and confrontational than the diplomatic boundaries we had established 3 weeks earlier. But Marcus's behavior at this lunch represented exactly the kind of strategic manipulation that I had explicitly asked him to avoid. That wasn't my intention, Marcus said, his voice carrying the wounded tone that meant he was preparing to position himself as misunderstood rather than manipulative. Your intention doesn't matter as much as your impact, I replied. You promised to respect my autonomy and stop trying to manage my career. But today you orchestrated a business meeting disguised as a social lunch. That's not respect. That's deception. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him. Recognizing that his attempt to create a business opportunity had violated the trust we had been working to rebuild. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I want you to call Jonathan Webster this afternoon and explain that I won't be pursuing the investment fund opportunity, I said. And I want you to understand that this kind of strategic maneuvering is exactly what damages our relationship and undermines my confidence in your transformation. But the opportunity itself has merit, Marcus protested. Even if my approach was wrong, the business proposition could be genuinely beneficial for your career. Maybe it could, I agreed. But that's my decision to make, not yours to orchestrate. If I'm interested in exploring business opportunities related to my artistic expertise, I'll do that through my own professional channels, not through your workplace networking. The key conversation concluded with Marcus's reluctant agreement to withdraw me from consideration for the Pinnacle Financial venture, but I could see his frustration with what he perceived as my rejection of a valuable opportunity. From his perspective, he had identified a potentially lucrative collaboration and arranged an introduction that could benefit both my career and our family finances. From my perspective, he had violated the boundaries we had established by using my success as a tool for his own professional advancement without my knowledge or consent. The fact that the opportunity might have been genuinely beneficial was less important than the deceptive manner in which it had been presented. As I drove home that afternoon, I realized that Marcus and I were still struggling with fundamentally different understandings of what our new dynamic should look like. He seemed to believe that as long as his suggestions and initiatives might benefit me financially, they were automatically welcome and appropriate. I needed him to understand that respect for my autonomy meant respecting my right to make choices about my own career, even if those choices might result in missed opportunities or reduced income. The money had given me the freedom to prioritize authenticity over optimization, and that freedom was more valuable than any business proposition he might arrange. The Pinnacle Financial lunch had been a test of whether Marcus could truly accept his reduced role in my professional decision-making, and he had failed that test by reverting to his old pattern of strategic management disguised as supportive partnership. But it had also been a test of my ability to maintain the boundaries I had established, regardless of the potential consequences for our relationship. In that respect, I felt confident that I had handled the situation appropriately, even though it meant disappointing Marcus's expectations and possibly damaging his standing with his colleagues. The evening would bring another difficult conversation, but I was prepared for it. The clarity I had gained about my own values and priorities was worth more than any business opportunity, and I wouldn't compromise that clarity to avoid conflict or preserve Marcus's comfort. The woman who had hidden her achievements to maintain domestic peace was gone, replaced by someone willing to defend her autonomy, even when that defense came at a cost. It was a transformation that went far beyond financial success, representing a fundamental shift in how I understood my own worth and my right to control my own destiny. 6 months after that awkward lunch at Pinnacle Financial, I stood in the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum's Spiral Gallery, watching technicians install the final pieces of Convergence: Digital Landscapes of Human Connection, my first major solo museum exhibition. The curved walls of Frank Lloyd Wright's architectural masterpiece provided a perfect backdrop for my interactive digital works, creating an immersive experience that transformed the entire space into a living artwork. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing in one of the world's most prestigious cultural institutions, preparing for an exhibition that would cement my reputation as a pioneering digital artist, while Marcus sat in our Millbrook Heights kitchen reviewing divorce papers that would dissolve our 15-year marriage. The transformation hadn't happened suddenly. Over the months following the Pinnacle Financial incident, Marcus and I had worked diligently to rebuild our relationship on the more equitable foundation we had negotiated that Friday morning in our kitchen. For a while, it had seemed like we might succeed. Marcus had made genuine efforts to respect my autonomy and support my artistic endeavors without trying to manage or control them. He had celebrated my acceptance of the Guggenheim exhibition with authentic enthusiasm. He had accommodated my frequent travel to New York for planning meetings without complaint. He had even attended several digital art conferences with me, asking thoughtful questions and engaging with other artists and curators in ways that suggested real interest rather than strategic networking. But beneath the surface adjustments, deeper incompatibilities had become increasingly apparent. Marcus's identity was fundamentally tied to being the primary breadwinner and decision-maker in our household. My financial independence and professional success hadn't just changed our economic dynamic, it had undermined his sense of purpose and self-worth in ways that no amount of conscious effort could completely overcome. The breaking point had come 3 months earlier, during a dinner party at David and Stephanie Thompson's house. The gathering included many of the same people who had witnessed Marcus's dismissive comments about my computer doodles at the Country Club charity gala, and I could see him struggling with the reversed dynamics as guests directed their attention and questions toward me rather than him. Claire's Guggenheim exhibition is generating international buzz, Amanda Rodriguez had mentioned during the cocktail hour. I read about it in Art Forum last week. The technology sounds absolutely revolutionary. The interactive elements are particularly innovative, added Rachel Kim, who had become one of my closest friends over the past year. Claire has essentially created a new form of artistic expression that could only exist in digital form. I had watched Marcus's expression throughout these conversations, seeing him try to maintain the supportive spouse persona while clearly struggling with his reduced role in the social dynamic. When someone asked about his own work at Pinnacle Financial, the conversation had shifted politely to his recent projects, but the energy had been dutiful rather than genuinely engaged. Later that evening, as we drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Heights, Marcus had finally voiced the thoughts I could see him wrestling with throughout the dinner. "I don't know how to be married to someone more successful than me," he had said, his voice carrying a vulnerability I rarely heard from him. I thought I could adjust to the new dynamic, but I'm realizing that my entire sense of self is tied up with being the accomplished partner in this relationship. The confession had been both heartbreaking and clarifying. Marcus wasn't a villain who had deliberately set out to undermine my artistic development. He was a man whose identity and self-worth were so intertwined with traditional gender roles and professional hierarchy that he couldn't adapt to a relationship where those roles were reversed. "I know you've worked hard to be supportive," I had replied, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm starting to think the problem isn't that you need to try harder. The problem might be that we want fundamentally different things from our marriage." That conversation had led to 3 months of couples therapy, honest discussions about our individual needs and expectations, and the gradual recognition that our relationship had been built on assumptions that no longer applied to either of our lives. Marcus needed to be with someone who would prioritize his career advancement and social status, someone whose own achievements would complement rather than overshadow his professional success. I needed a partner who could celebrate my accomplishments without feeling threatened by them, someone whose sense of self-worth wasn't dependent on being the primary breadwinner and decision-maker. The divorce proceedings had been remarkably amicable, facilitated by prenuptial agreements that clearly defined separate property, and by our mutual recognition that ending the marriage was better for both of us than continuing to struggle with incompatible expectations. Marcus would keep the house in Millbrook Heights and maintain his position in the social circles that were important to his professional advancement. I would keep the studio and all of my artistic assets, along with the freedom to pursue my career, without worrying about how my success might impact his ego or social standing. More importantly, we had both gained clarity about what we needed from future relationships. Marcus could find someone who would appreciate his traditional approach to marriage and professional partnership. I could build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than economic dependency and social convenience. Now, standing in the Guggenheim's soaring gallery space, I felt a sense of completion that went far beyond the artistic achievement represented by the exhibition. The woman who had hidden her talent to avoid threatening her husband's ego had evolved into someone confident enough to claim her space in the world's most prestigious cultural institutions. "The interactive responses are calibrated perfectly," said Dr. Elena Vasquez, the museum's curator of contemporary art, as she reviewed the final installations. "The way viewers' movements influence the visual elements creates a genuinely participatory experience." I nodded, watching as technicians tested the sensor arrays that would allow visitors to interact with the digital works through gesture and movement. The technology was sophisticated, but it was the artistic vision that made the installation significant. Each piece in the exhibition explored different aspects of human connection in an increasingly digital world, using interactivity not as a gimmick, but as an integral element of the emotional experience. "The opening reception tomorrow will include collectors and curators from around the world," Dr. Vasquez continued. "This exhibition positions you at the forefront of a completely new artistic movement." The recognition was gratifying, but it felt secondary to the personal transformation that had made it possible. The financial success had given me the freedom to take creative risks and pursue ambitious projects without worrying about commercial viability. The end of my marriage had eliminated the need to minimize my achievements or hide my ambitions to preserve domestic harmony. For the first time in my adult life, I was free to be completely authentic about my capabilities and aspirations. The relief was profound and transformative in ways that went far beyond professional success. That evening, I attended a pre-opening dinner with museum board members, prominent collectors, and other artists whose work was featured in the museum's contemporary collections. The conversation was intellectually stimulating and professionally valuable, but what struck me most was how comfortable I felt engaging with these accomplished people as a peer, rather than as someone's spouse making polite conversation. "You're Work represents a genuine innovation in how we think about audience participation in artistic experience, said Dr. Michael Harrison, a professor of digital media at Columbia University, who had written extensively about technology and creativity. The theoretical implications are as significant as the aesthetic achievements. I found myself discussing complex ideas about interactivity, consciousness, and artistic meaning, with the kind of intellectual depth that had been missing from my conversations in Millbrook Heights social circles. These were people who understood that art could be both beautiful and intellectually rigorous, who appreciated innovation without requiring it to be commercially optimized. "Have you considered teaching?" asked Patricia Molina, a curator from the Museum of Modern Art, who had been following my work since the Infinite Moments sale. "There are several university programs that would benefit enormously from your expertise in digital art technology." The suggestion intrigued me, not because I was seeking additional career opportunities, but because it represented another form of authentic engagement with my artistic development. Teaching would allow me to share knowledge and inspire other artists while continuing to push the boundaries of what was possible in digital creativity. "I'd be interested in exploring that possibility," I said, meaning it sincerely. "The intersection of art and technology is evolving so rapidly that there's tremendous value in sharing techniques and discoveries." As the evening progressed, I found myself making plans for collaborations, considering speaking engagements, and discussing projects that would have been impossible under my old life constraints. The freedom to say yes to opportunities based on their intrinsic interest rather than their impact on domestic harmony was intoxicating. The exhibition opening the following day exceeded all expectations. The Guggenheim's Spiral Gallery was filled with art collectors, museum professionals, technology executives, and digital artists from around the world. The interactive elements of the installation created a dynamic, ever-changing environment that transformed the museum space into a living artwork. "This is genuinely revolutionary," said Tony Castellano, who had flown in from Los Angeles for the opening. "You've created something that can only be fully experienced in person, which gives digital art a physicality and presence that rivals traditional media." I moved through the crowd, discussing the technical and conceptual aspects of the work, with visitors who ranged from curious art enthusiasts to sophisticated collectors evaluating potential acquisitions. The level of engagement and understanding was far beyond anything I had experienced in my previous social contexts. "The market response has been extraordinary," Tony said during a quiet moment between conversations. "We've received preliminary inquiries about acquiring pieces from the exhibition, and there's already interest in commissioning new works for private collections." The commercial success was gratifying, but it felt less important than the artistic recognition and the personal satisfaction of creating something genuinely innovative. The money had given me the freedom to pursue ambitious projects, but the real reward was the creative fulfillment that came from pushing the boundaries of what art could be and do. As the evening concluded, I stood alone in the gallery for a few minutes, watching the digital works respond to the ambient movement and sound in the space. The pieces seemed to breathe with their own life, colors shifting and patterns evolving in response to the gallery's environment. It was a moment of profound satisfaction, seeing 3 years of hidden work transformed into a public celebration of innovation and creativity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Despite our divorce, we had maintained cordial communication, particularly around significant professional milestones. The message was brief but genuinely warm. "Saw the Times review of your exhibition. Congratulations, Claire. You've achieved something truly remarkable." The New York Times review had been published that morning, with art critic Helen Morrison describing the exhibition as a watershed moment in contemporary art and praising the way I had seamlessly integrated cutting-edge technology with profound emotional resonance. The review would be reprinted in art publications around the world, cementing my reputation as a pioneering figure in digital art. But standing in that gallery, surrounded by the fruits of years of dedication and creative risk-taking. I felt most proud of the personal transformation that had made the artistic achievement possible. The woman who had apologized for taking up space in her own marriage had evolved into someone confident enough to claim space in the world's most prestigious cultural institutions. 6 months later, I was living in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn's Dumbo neighborhood, having traded the manicured perfection of Millbrook Heights for the creative energy of New York's art scene. My new studio occupied the entire top floor of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of the Manhattan skyline and the Brooklyn Bridge. The space was a temple to creative possibility, equipped with the most advanced digital art technology available and designed to accommodate both individual work and collaborative projects with other artists. The contrast with my former garage studio was striking, not just in terms of scale and sophistication, but in what the space represented about my willingness to prioritize my artistic development over conventional domestic comfort. The teaching component has been extraordinarily fulfilling, I told Dr. Sarah Chen, the dean of Columbia University's School of the Arts, during our monthly check-in meeting. I had accepted a visiting professor position that allowed me to share my expertise with graduate students while maintaining my own artistic practice. Your students consistently rate your courses as among the most challenging and inspiring in the program, Dr. Chen replied. The waiting list for your advanced digital media seminar is longer than any other offering in the department. Teaching had proven to be an unexpected source of creative energy. Working with young artists who were eager to push boundaries and explore new possibilities reminded me of my own sense of discovery when I first began experimenting with interactive digital art. The students' questions and experiments often sparked ideas for my own work, creating a productive cycle of mutual inspiration. I'm particularly excited about the collaborative installation project we're developing for the Venice Biennale, I said, referring to an ambitious piece that would involve 12 students working with me to create an interactive environment that responded to data from climate sensors around the world. The Venice Biennale represented the pinnacle of international art recognition, and my invitation to participate in the prestigious exhibition was a testament to how rapidly my reputation had grown since the Guggenheim show. The collaborative nature of the project reflected my growing interest in using art to address social and environmental issues, moving beyond purely aesthetic concerns to engage with urgent contemporary challenges. The university's support for that project has been remarkable, Dr. Chen noted. The engineering department's collaboration on the sensor technology is exactly the kind of interdisciplinary work that distinguishes our program. As I walked back to my studio that afternoon, crossing the Brooklyn Bridge with its spectacular views of Lower Manhattan, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 2 years. The financial success had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had been psychological and creative. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to pursue opportunities that aligned with my values rather than others' expectations, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than economic dependency. The divorce from Marcus had been painful but ultimately liberating. We had remained friends, exchanging occasional messages about professional achievements and personal milestones. He had recently become engaged to a marketing executive who specialized in luxury brand management, someone whose career would complement rather than compete with his own advancement at Pinnacle Financial. From everything I could tell, they were genuinely happy together, having found the kind of traditional partnership that we had never been able to create. My own romantic life had evolved more slowly but with greater intentionality. I was dating a curator from the Whitney Museum, someone who understood the demands of a creative career and shared my passion for innovative art. Our relationship was built on intellectual compatibility and mutual support rather than economic necessity or social convenience, and it felt fundamentally different from my marriage to Marcus. The response to your latest collection has been overwhelming, said Tony Castellano during our weekly phone call. We've received acquisition inquiries from 14 different institutions, and the private collector interest is unlike anything I've seen in digital art. My newest work, Symbiosis, explored the relationship between human consciousness and artificial intelligence through interactive pieces that learned and evolved based on viewer interactions. The technical complexity had required collaboration with computer scientists and cognitive researchers, but the artistic results were groundbreaking in their emotional sophistication. The piece at the Whitney has generated more visitor engagement than any digital work in their collection, Tony continued. People are spending an average of 43 minutes interacting with it, which is extraordinary for any artwork, but particularly for a technology-based piece. The commercial success was gratifying, but I had learned to value recognition and creative fulfillment as much as financial rewards. The money had given me freedom, but it was the artistic achievement and intellectual respect that provided lasting satisfaction. I've been thinking about establishing a foundation, I told Tony. Something focused on supporting emerging digital artists who might not have access to the technology and resources needed to develop their vision. The idea had been developing for months, inspired by my teaching experience and my awareness of how expensive and technically complex digital art creation could be. Many talented artists were excluded from the field simply because they lacked access to advanced computers, specialized software, and the technical training needed to realize their creative ideas. That's a wonderful concept, Tony said enthusiastically. Your reputation and connections could make a real difference for artists who are just starting to explore digital media. The foundation would become my next major project, allowing me to share the opportunities that my success had created while supporting the development of new voices in digital art. It represented a different kind of achievement than individual, artistic recognition, but one that felt equally important to my sense of purpose and contribution. That evening, I attended the opening reception for a group exhibition at a gallery in Chelsea, where several of my former students were showing work alongside established digital artists. The energy in the room was electric, with conversations bouncing between technical innovation and aesthetic philosophy, between commercial strategy and artistic integrity. Your influence on the next generation of digital artists is already apparent, said Dr. Michael Harrison, the Columbia professor who had become both a colleague and a friend. The students you've mentored are pushing boundaries in ways that weren't imaginable 5 years ago. I watched my former students explaining their work to collectors and critics, seeing them navigate the same balance between artistic vision and commercial viability that had defined my own career development. The pride I felt in their achievements was different from personal accomplishment but equally satisfying. Teaching has given me a different perspective on success, I replied. Individual achievement feels less important when you're contributing to a larger movement of creative innovation. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with emerging artists, established collectors, museum curators, and technology executives who were all engaged with the rapidly evolving intersection of art and digital innovation. The community that had formed around digital art was diverse and intellectually stimulating in ways that my old social circles in Millbrook Heights had never been. Your work has opened doors for all of us, said Maria Santos, a young artist, whose interactive sculptures combined traditional materials with responsive digital elements. The institutional recognition you've achieved has legitimized digital art in ways that make it easier for the rest of us to be taken seriously. The comment reminded me of how isolated I had felt when I first began exploring digital art 3 years earlier. The field had been dominated by technologists who lacked artistic training and traditional artists who were suspicious of digital media. My success had helped bridge that gap, creating space for a new generation of artists who moved fluidly between technological innovation and aesthetic sophistication. The field is evolving so rapidly that everyone is learning from everyone else, I said. The collaborative nature of digital art makes individual success less meaningful than collective advancement. By midnight, I was back in my Brooklyn studio, energized by the evening's conversations and eager to continue work on my latest project. The warehouse space felt alive with creative possibility, its vast windows offering panoramic views of the city that never slept. I pulled up the files for Emergence, a new collection that would explore the relationship between individual identity and collective consciousness through works that evolved based on aggregated data from social media interactions. The technical challenges were immense, requiring real-time analysis of vast data streams and translation of that information into meaningful visual experiences. But the artistic vision was clear: to create works that reflected the contemporary human experience of being simultaneously individual and connected, autonomous and influenced by collective behavior. The pieces would serve as mirrors, showing viewers how their own actions and choices were part of larger patterns of human behavior and social change. As I worked through the night, coding new interactive algorithms and sketching visual concepts, I felt the deep satisfaction that came from pursuing work that was both personally meaningful and professionally ambitious. The financial freedom had made this level of creative risk-taking possible, but it was the artistic vision that made it worthwhile. The contrast with my former life was profound. 2 years earlier, I had been hiding my creative achievements and minimizing my ambitions to preserve domestic harmony. Now, I was working openly on projects that would be seen by millions of people and studied by future generations of artists and scholars. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless. Ending my marriage and rebuilding my entire social and professional life had required courage and persistence that I hadn't been sure I possessed. But the rewards had far exceeded the challenges, creating opportunities for growth and fulfillment that I could never have imagined while living within the constraints of my old life. As dawn broke over the East River, painting the studio walls, with golden light, I saved my work and stepped out onto the building's roof terrace. The city spread out below me, millions of people beginning their daily routines, pursuing their own dreams and ambitions and creative visions. I thought about Marcus, probably having coffee in our old kitchen in Millbrook Heights, preparing for another day of corporate meetings and strategic planning. I thought about my former neighbors, maintaining their perfect lawns and attending their charity galas and measuring success through the accumulation of status symbols and social approval. There was nothing wrong with those choices, but they were no longer my choices. The money had given me the freedom to choose differently, to prioritize artistic fulfillment over social acceptance, creative risk-taking over financial security, authentic relationships over convenient partnerships. Standing on that rooftop, watching the sunrise illuminate the city that had become my new home, I felt grateful for every part of the journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of hiding my achievements had taught me to value authentic success over external validation. The painful process of ending my marriage had shown me the importance of building relationships on mutual respect rather than economic dependency. Most importantly, the creative work itself had taught me that genuine fulfillment came not from what others thought of my achievements, but from the satisfaction of creating something meaningful and sharing it with the world. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space was gone, replaced by someone confident enough to claim her place among the most innovative artists of her generation. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. Part 5. The New Reality. 2 years after that transformative night at the Guggenheim, I stood before an audience of 500 art collectors, museum directors, and technology executives at the annual Digital Arts Symposium in San Francisco, delivering the keynote address that would define my role as a thought leader in the rapidly evolving intersection of creativity and technology. The question isn't whether artificial intelligence will replace human creativity, I said, gesturing toward the large screen behind me that displayed one of my latest interactive pieces. The question is how we can use these powerful tools to amplify human creativity in ways that were previously impossible. The audience was engaged and responsive, asking sophisticated questions about the technical innovations in my work and the philosophical implications of human-AI collaboration in artistic creation. These were people who understood that art could be both aesthetically beautiful and intellectually rigorous. who appreciated innovation without requiring it to conform to traditional market categories. Your work has fundamentally changed how we think about audience participation in artistic experience, said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the director of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, during the panel discussion that followed my presentation. The interactive elements aren't just technological novelties, they're integral to the emotional and intellectual impact of the pieces. I had spent the morning touring the museum's new digital art wing, which featured several of my pieces alongside works by other pioneering artists who were exploring the creative possibilities of emerging technologies. The institutional recognition was gratifying, but what struck me most was how natural it felt to be discussing complex artistic and technical concepts with people who shared my passion for creative innovation. The Foundation's work has been equally transformational, added Robert Chen, a venture capitalist who specialized in arts funding. The Emerging Artist Residency Program has supported some of the most exciting new voices in digital art. The Claire Davidson Foundation for Digital Arts Innovation had grown rapidly since its launch 18 months earlier, providing grants, technical resources, and mentorship opportunities for artists who might otherwise lack access to the expensive equipment and specialized training required for sophisticated digital art creation. The program had already supported 67 emerging artists, several of whom had gone on to achieve significant recognition in galleries and museums around the world. Art should be accessible to people with vision and talent, regardless of their economic background, I replied. The Foundation exists to ensure that financial barriers don't prevent innovative artists from developing and sharing their creative ideas. The Foundation had become as personally fulfilling as my own artistic work, allowing me to share the opportunities that my success had created while supporting the development of new voices in digital art. Every grant recipient and residency participant represented someone whose creative potential might otherwise have remained unrealized due to lack of resources or technical access. After the symposium concluded, I took a cab to the airport for the flight back to New York, where I would spend the following week preparing for the opening of my latest exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. The show, Collective Consciousness, Art in the Age of Connection, would feature 12 new pieces that explored how individual creativity could emerge from and contribute to larger patterns of human collaboration and shared experience. During the flight, I reviewed emails from curators, collectors, and fellow artists who were following my work and the Foundation's activities with interest. The digital art community had grown exponentially over the past few years, evolving from a niche field dominated by technology enthusiasts to a recognized art movement with institutional support and serious critical attention. The Venice Biennale installation exceeded all expectations, wrote Dr. Elena Vasquez, my former curator at the Guggenheim. The collaborative piece you developed with your students has been featured in art publications around the world, and several museums have inquired about acquiring components for their permanent collections. The Venice project had indeed been a triumph, both artistically and personally. Working with 12 graduate students to create an interactive environment that responded to real-time climate data had pushed all of us to think more deeply about the relationship between art, technology, and social responsibility. The installation had attracted millions of visitors and generated international discussions about the role of art in addressing environmental challenges. I wanted to let you know that Marcus stopped by the gallery yesterday, read another message. This one from Amanda Rodriguez, who now served on the Foundation's advisory board. He seemed genuinely proud when discussing your achievements with other visitors. The personal growth you've both experienced since the divorce has been remarkable to witness. I smiled at Amanda's observation about Marcus's evolution. Our divorce had been difficult for both of us, but it had ultimately allowed each of us to find relationships and life paths that better aligned with our individual needs and values. Marcus had married his marketing executive fiancée the previous year, and from all accounts, they had built the kind of traditional partnership that we had never been able to achieve. More importantly, Marcus had learned to separate his self-worth from his need to be the dominant partner in a relationship. His new wife was successful in her own right, but her career complemented rather than overshadowed his own professional advancement. They seemed genuinely happy together, having found the compatibility that we had never possessed. "Your influence on the next generation of artists continues to expand," read a message from Dr. Sarah Chen at Columbia. "The waiting list for your graduate seminar has grown to over 200 students, and we're considering creating additional sections to meet the demand." Teaching had become an increasingly important part of my professional identity, allowing me to share technical knowledge and creative insights with artists who would carry digital art into new directions. The students brought fresh perspectives and innovative ideas that often influenced my own work, creating a productive cycle of mutual inspiration and learning. As the plane descended toward JFK Airport, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that humiliating evening at the Grandview Country Club charity gala. The woman who had stood frozen while her husband mocked her computer doodles had evolved into someone whose work was studied in universities, collected by major museums, and recognized as pioneering contributions to contemporary art. But the external success felt less important than the internal transformation that had made it possible. The financial independence had given me choices, but it was the psychological growth that had enabled me to make those choices with confidence and clarity. I no longer needed anyone else's validation to know that my work was valuable. I no longer apologized for taking up space or minimized my achievements to make others comfortable. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to pursue opportunities that aligned with my values, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than economic dependency or social convenience. The taxi ride from the airport to my Brooklyn studio took me through neighborhoods where artists, writers, musicians, and other creative professionals had built communities around shared interests and values rather than income levels or social status. The energy was different from Millbrook Heights, more diverse and intellectually stimulating, focused on innovation and creative expression rather than the accumulation of traditional status symbols. My warehouse studio had evolved into a hub of creative activity, with visiting artists using the space for collaborative projects and foundation grant recipients attending workshops on advanced digital art techniques. The building's owner, a sculptor who had been working in Brooklyn for over 30 years, had created a community of artists who supported each other's work while maintaining individual creative independence. "The MoMA installation is progressing beautifully," said Carlos Mendez, my longtime studio manager who oversaw the technical aspects of my increasingly complex projects. "The sensor arrays arrived this morning, and the programming team has completed the initial calibration tests." Carlos had joined my team 18 months earlier, after completing his master's degree in digital media at NYU. His combination of technical expertise and artistic sensibility made him invaluable for managing the complex logistics of museum installations and collaborative projects. "How are the Foundation's summer residency applications progressing?" I asked, settling into my desk to review the day's correspondence. "We received over 400 applications for 12 positions," Carlos replied. "The selection committee has narrowed it down to 50 finalists and will need to make final decisions by the end of next week." The Foundation's residency program had become highly competitive, attracting applications from emerging artists around the world who wanted to develop their digital art skills using professional-grade equipment and mentorship from experienced practitioners. The program provided full funding for 3-month residencies that included studio space, technical training, and exhibition opportunities. "The quality of applications has been extraordinary this year," said Dr. Maria Santos, the Foundation's artistic director, joining our conversation via video call from her office in Los Angeles. "We're seeing sophisticated proposals from artists who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in digital media." Maria had been one of my earliest students at Columbia and had gone on to achieve significant recognition for her own innovative work combining traditional sculpture with responsive digital elements. Her appointment as the foundation's artistic director reflected my commitment to supporting emerging artists, not just as grant recipients, but as professional partners in building the digital art community. I'm particularly excited about the collaborative projects with international artists, Maria continued. The partnership with the London Digital Arts Collective has created opportunities for cross-cultural artistic exchange that wouldn't have existed otherwise. As evening approached, I walked out onto the studio's roof terrace to watch the sunset. Over Manhattan, the city skyline was a constant source of inspiration, its patterns of light and movement reflecting the kind of complex, ever-changing beauty that I tried to capture in my interactive digital works. My phone buzzed with a text message from James Morrison, the Whitney Museum curator I had been dating for 8 months. "Dinner at 8? I have news about the retrospective proposal." James and I had met at a digital art conference in Miami, where we had spent hours discussing the challenges and opportunities of presenting technology-based art in traditional museum settings. Our relationship had developed slowly but steadily, built on intellectual compatibility and shared passion for innovative art rather than economic necessity or social convenience. The retrospective he was referring to would be a comprehensive survey of my work over the past 5 years, potentially the largest exhibition of digital art in the Whitney's history. The proposal was still under review by the museum's board, but early indications suggested strong support from both curators and trustees. "Looking forward to it," I texted back. "Good news or challenging news?" "Definitely good," came his immediate reply. "Board approval, target date next fall." I smiled, feeling the familiar excitement that came with new professional opportunities, combined with the deeper satisfaction of sharing those opportunities with someone who genuinely understood their significance. The relationship with James felt fundamentally different from my marriage to Marcus, built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than traditional gender roles and economic dependency. As I prepared to leave the studio for dinner, I took a final look at the work in progress that filled the vast space. Canvases, computer screens, and electronic components shared space with traditional art materials, reflecting the hybrid nature of contemporary creative practice. Everything in the room represented a choice I had made freely, without worrying about how those choices might affect someone else's ego or social standing. The financial success had made this freedom possible, but it was the psychological transformation that had made it meaningful. I had learned to value my own judgment, to pursue opportunities that aligned with my values, and to build relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than conventional expectations. Walking across the Brooklyn Bridge toward my dinner with James, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from hiding my achievements in a suburban garage to claiming my place among the most innovative artists of my generation. The path hadn't been easy or straightforward, but every challenge had contributed to the clarity and confidence that now defined my approach to both creative work and personal relationships. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space was gone, replaced by someone who understood that authentic success came not from external validation, but from the courage to pursue meaningful work and share it generously with the world. The transformation was complete, but the work itself was just beginning. Standing in the middle of the bridge with the city lights reflecting off the East River, I felt profound gratitude for every experience that had shaped this journey. The twee. Years of dismissal and minimization had taught me to value genuine recognition over superficial approval. The painful process of ending my marriage had shown me the importance of building relationships on mutual respect rather than economic dependency. Most importantly, the creative work itself had taught me that true fulfillment came not from what others thought of my achievements, but from the deep satisfaction of creating something meaningful and sharing it authentically with the world. The money had changed everything by giving me choices I had never possessed before. But it was the courage to make those choices based on my own values rather than others' expectations that had transformed my life in ways that went far beyond financial success. Tomorrow would bring new projects, new collaborations, new opportunities. to push the boundaries of what art could be and do. But tonight, walking toward dinner with someone who shared my passion for creative innovation, I felt complete in ways that had nothing to do with external achievement, and everything to do with the freedom to be authentically myself. The story that had begun with humiliation and dismissal had become one of transformation and triumph, not because I had defeated anyone else, but because I had finally learned to honor my own vision and trust my own judgment. The real victory wasn't in proving Marcus wrong about my capabilities. It was in discovering that I no longer needed anyone else's validation to know my own worth. The future stretched ahead full of possibility, and for the first time in my life, I was free to embrace it completely. 3 years had passed since the charity gala revelation that changed everything, and I stood in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, surrounded by 400 distinguished guests celebrating the opening of Digital Renaissance, the Claire Davidson collection. The museum had acquired 27 of my pieces for their permanent collection, creating the first dedicated digital art wing in their 150-year history. The irony wasn't lost on me that many of the faces in the crowd were the same people who had witnessed Marcus dismiss my work as computer doodles at the Grandview Country Club. Tonight, those same individuals approached me with reverent enthusiasm, eager to discuss the cultural significance of digital art and my role in establishing it as a legitimate artistic medium. Mrs. Davidson, your transformation of the art world has been absolutely remarkable, gushed Patricia Morrison, a socialite whose husband owned one of the largest private art collections in the country. The same woman who had once nodded politely when Marcus described my work as expensive therapy now spoke with breathless admiration about my visionary contributions to contemporary culture. I accepted her praise graciously while internally marveling at how dramatically perception could shift when success became undeniable. These weren't different people with evolved tastes. They were the same individuals who had once viewed my artistic pursuits as amusing diversions from serious adult responsibilities. The museum's acquisition represents a watershed moment for digital art, said Dr. Thomas Richardson, the Met's director, during his opening remarks. Claire Davidson's work demonstrates that technology-based art can achieve the same emotional depth and cultural significance as traditional media, while opening entirely new possibilities for artistic expression. The speech was being live-streamed to art institutions around the world, cementing my position as a foundational figure in the digital art movement. Universities were already developing curricula around my techniques, and several major museums had announced plans for their own digital art collections. But the professional recognition, while deeply satisfying, felt less significant than the personal transformation that had made it possible. The woman standing in this ballroom bore little resemblance to the one who had once hidden her achievements, to avoid threatening her husband's ego. I had learned to occupy space confidently, to speak about my work with authority, and to make decisions based on my own values rather than others' expectations. Your foundation's impact on emerging artists has been extraordinary, said Dr. Angela Foster, the dean of Yale's School of Art, joining our conversation. The technical resources and mentorship opportunities you've provided have democratized access to digital art creation in unprecedented ways. The Claire Davidson Foundation had evolved into a major force in the art world, supporting over 200 emerging artists through grants, residencies, and educational programs. The foundation's annual budget now exceeded $12 million, funded by sales of my work and contributions from collectors who had benefited from early investments in digital art. Every artist deserves the opportunity to develop their vision without being constrained by economic limitations, I replied. The foundation exists to ensure that talent and creativity matter more than financial background or institutional connections. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with museum directors, collectors, and fellow artists who treated me as a peer and thought leader, rather than someone's spouse making polite social conversation. The shift was profound and liberating, representing the kind of authentic professional recognition I had craved during those years of hiding my accomplishments. The collaboration with the Google Arts Institute has been groundbreaking, mentioned Robert Kim, a technology executive whose company had partnered with the foundation to develop new tools for digital art creation. The open-source software you've helped develop is being used by artists in over 60 countries. The technology partnerships had been among my most satisfying professional achievements, allowing me to share not just financial resources, but actual creative tools with artists worldwide. The software development project had taken 18 months and involved collaborating with programmers, designers, and artists to create platforms that made sophisticated digital art accessible to people with limited technical training. Democratizing. Technology has always been as important to me as creating individual artworks, I said. Art should be a conversation between many voices, not a privilege reserved for those with expensive equipment and specialized training. The comment reflected a philosophy that had evolved from my own experience of feeling excluded and underestimated. Having struggled to gain recognition for my work, I was committed to ensuring that other talented artists wouldn't face similar barriers to entry or development. Speaking of conversations, interrupted James Morrison, appearing at my side with his characteristic warm smile, I believe someone is eager to speak with you. James gestured toward a young woman standing nervously near one of my digital installations, clearly wanting to approach but uncertain about interrupting my conversations with established art world figures. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with the kind of intense focus that I recognized in serious artists. Excuse me, I said to the group, walking over to the young woman with genuine curiosity about what she wanted to share. Ms. Davidson, I'm Sarah Chen, she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement and nervousness. I'm a graduate student at Parsons, and your work completely changed how I think about art and technology. Sarah explained that she had been studying traditional painting when she first encountered my digital installations 2 years earlier. The experience had inspired her to learn programming and digital design, despite having no technical background and limited financial resources for equipment. I applied for your foundation's residency program 3 times before being accepted, she continued. The 3 months I spent in your Brooklyn studio were transformational. I learned more about creative possibility than I had in 4 years of formal art education. Sarah showed me images on her phone of the work she had created during and after her residency, sophisticated interactive pieces that combined traditional painting techniques with responsive digital elements. The quality was impressive, but what struck me most was the confidence in her artistic vision. I wanted to thank you personally, Sarah said. Not just for the technical training and equipment access, but for proving that art can be both innovative and meaningful. Your success gave me permission to pursue my own unconventional ideas. The conversation reminded me of my own journey from isolation to recognition, and the crucial role that encouragement and support had played in my development. Sarah represented hundreds of emerging artists who had benefited from foundation programs, each carrying digital art into new directions and applications. Your work is already making important contributions to the field, I replied sincerely. The Foundation's mission is to support artists like you who are pushing boundaries and exploring new possibilities. As Sarah walked away to rejoin her friends, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. The success of my own work had created opportunities for other artists to develop their vision, multiplying the impact of my initial breakthrough in ways that individual recognition alone could never accomplish. That's the real legacy, said Dr. Maria Santos, appearing beside me with a glass of champagne. Maria had transitioned from Foundation Artistic Director to Independent Curator, organizing digital art exhibitions for museums around the world. Not just your own artistic contributions, but the entire movement you've helped create. Maria was right. The digital art community that had emerged over the past few years included hundreds of artists, curators, collectors, and technologists who were collectively expanding the definition of what art could be and do. My success had been the catalyst, but the movement now had its own momentum and direction. The retrospective at the Whitney next month will include work from 12 Foundation alumni, Maria continued. It's remarkable to see how diverse and sophisticated the field has become. The Whitney retrospective would be the largest exhibition of my work to date, spanning 15 years of creative development from my earliest digital experiments to my latest AI collaboration projects. The show would also feature pieces by other artists whose work had been influenced by or developed in response to my innovations. James mentioned that you're considering the Venice Biennale directorship offer, Maria said, referring to an invitation I had received the previous week to serve as curator for the next international exhibition. The Venice Biennale represented the pinnacle of art world recognition, and the invitation to curate the prestigious exhibition was acknowledgement of my influence on contemporary artistic discourse. The position would require 2 years of intensive work, traveling globally to identify and develop new artistic voices for the world's most important art exhibition. I'm seriously considering it, I replied. The opportunity to shape international conversation about art and technology would be extraordinary. The evening concluded with Dr. Richardson's announcement that the Met was establishing an annual lecture series in my name, focused on the intersection of art and technology. The Claire Davidson Lectures would bring leading thinkers and creators to New York for public discussions about the future of creative expression in an increasingly digital world. This honor reflects not just your artistic achievements, Dr. Richardson said during his closing remarks, but your role as a thought leader who has fundamentally changed how cultural institutions think about contemporary art. The lecture series represented the kind of institutional recognition that solidified artistic legacy, ensuring that my contributions would continue influencing future generations of artists and thinkers. It was the sort of achievement that Marcus and his colleagues at Pinnacle Financial could understand and respect, even if they still didn't fully appreciate the artistic vision that had made it possible. As the crowd began to disperse, I noticed a familiar figure near the museum's entrance. Marcus stood with his wife, Jennifer, examining one of my digital installations with what appeared to be genuine interest and admiration. Our eyes met across the room, and he raised his champagne glass in a subtle toast of acknowledgement. I walked over to greet them, curious about what Marcus would say about the evening's celebration. Our relationship had evolved into cordial friendship over the past few years, built on mutual respect for each other's achievements and recognition that our divorce had been beneficial for both of us. Claire, congratulations, Marcus said warmly, embracing me with genuine affection. This exhibition is extraordinary. I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished. Jennifer, whom I had met several times at social events, added her own enthusiastic praise. The pieces are unlike anything I've ever experienced. The way they respond to movement and interaction is absolutely magical. Thank you both, I replied. It means a great deal to have your support. The conversation was comfortable and authentic, free from the tension and resentment that had characterized our final years of marriage. Marcus had found happiness in his traditional partnership with Jennifer, while I had discovered fulfillment in pursuing my artistic vision without compromise. We should celebrate properly, Marcus said. Jennifer and I would love to take you and James to dinner later this week if you're available. The invitation reflected how dramatically our relationship had evolved. Marcus no longer felt threatened by my success, partly because he had found his own satisfaction in conventional achievement, and partly because enough time had passed for wounds to heal and perspectives to mature. I'd enjoy that, I said sincerely. Let's find a time that works for everyone. After Marcus and Jennifer departed, James and I remained in the gallery for a few additional minutes, enjoying the quiet after the excitement of the opening reception. The digital installations continued their subtle animations, responding to our presence with gentle shifts in color and pattern. How does it feel? James asked, gesturing toward the plaques that identified the pieces as part of the museum's permanent collection. I considered his question carefully, trying to articulate the complex emotions of the evening. The professional recognition was deeply satisfying, representing the culmination of years of dedicated work and creative risk-taking. But the personal transformation felt more significant than any external achievement. It feels like completion, I said finally. Not the end of something, but the fulfillment of potential that existed all along. The woman who had once hidden her achievements to avoid threatening her husband's ego had evolved into someone confident enough to claim her place among the most important artists of her generation. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had contributed to the clarity and strength that now defined my approach to both creative work and personal relationships. The Venice Biennale offer represents an incredible opportunity, James said, broaching the subject that we had been discussing privately for several weeks. The curator position would require extensive travel and time away from my New York-based life and relationships. It was exactly the kind of career decision that I could now make based purely on artistic and professional considerations, without worrying about how those choices might affect someone else's ego or social standing. I think I'm going to accept it, I said, feeling certainty crystallize as I spoke the words aloud. The opportunity to shape international artistic discourse is too significant to decline. James nodded with the understanding that came from sharing similar professional ambitions and commitments. Our relationship was built on mutual support for each other's career development, rather than expectations that personal considerations would automatically take precedence over professional opportunities. We'll figure out the logistics, he said simply. Great opportunities like this don't come along often. As we walked out of the museum into the crisp October evening, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The financial success had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had been psychological and creative. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to pursue opportunities that aligned with my values, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than economic dependency. The city stretched out before us, millions of people pursuing their own dreams and ambitions. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Foundation residents were working in the studio spaces I had helped create, developing artistic visions that would push digital art into new territories. Somewhere around the world, artists were using the open-source software my team had developed, democratizing access to sophisticated creative tools. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space was gone, replaced by someone who understood that authentic success came not from external validation, but from the courage to pursue meaningful work and share it generously with the world. Standing on the museum steps with James, looking out at the city that had become my home and creative community, I felt complete in ways that had everything to do with personal authenticity and nothing to do with others' approval. The story that had begun with humiliation and dismissal had become one of transformation and contribution, not because I had defeated anyone else, but because I had finally learned to honor my own vision and trust my own worth. The future stretched ahead full of possibility, from the Venice Biennale to new artistic collaborations to continued growth of the Foundation's impact. For the first time in my life, I was completely free to embrace that future on my own terms, confident in my abilities and clear about my values. The real victory hadn't been proving Marcus wrong about my capabilities. It had been discovering that I no longer needed anyone else's validation to know my own worth. The money had given me choices, but it was the courage to make those choices authentically that had transformed my life in ways that went far beyond financial success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I was exactly where I belonged, standing confidently in my own space, surrounded by work that represented my authentic vision, ready to continue building something meaningful and lasting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.